Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem studio. Jonathan, our regular host, will be back soon. Israel could never match its neighbors for quantity of military weapons and formations, so it has concentrated on improving its qualitative advantages. Does it still have this edge, or is the gap between herself and her neighbors is being closed, even as it is upgrading its air force, intelligence, and cyber capabilities? To further discuss this matter, I am joined here in the studio by Dr. Eran Lerman, Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute of Strategic Studies and a lecturer at Shalem Institute, TV7 analyst Ms. Paula Slier, and Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves Reuven Ben Shalom, cross-cultural analyst and a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Welcome.
Thank you.
Colonel Lerman, as you are, in addition to being Dr. Lerman, there is a myth that Israel has been always better qualitatively than the neighboring armies and organizations. Is it really so, or is it mostly psychological warfare for the purpose of deterrence?
No, I think at the basis of deterrence lies a very solid set of Israeli capabilities, which have been brought to bear in recent years in a very specific manner, what General Eisenkot in his doctrine calls the campaign between the wars, by its Hebrew initials, MABAM, a way of bringing to bear intelligence superiority and air superiority, which are very clearly well established.
General Eisenkot being the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces.
The current and outgoing chief of staff of the IDF, a very remarkable, I think left a remarkable imprint on the IDF conceptual frame. The question of ground warfare is somewhat different because at the end of the day, limited operations in 2006 and three cases in Gaza, two of which involved ground warfare, and one of them involved the threat of ground warfare, have raised questions in the minds of people whether this is the old IDF as we knew it. And some of our neighbors, like Hassan Nasrallah, are playing games with maybe we've lost our nerve, maybe our soldiers are no longer willing to sacrifice themselves. Well, I took my mother to the Palmach, and I was glad to meet you there, the Palmach reunion this week. At that time, we were facing existential threats.
1948 and
1948,
before.
the War of Independence, 47, a war with our back to the wall for sheer survival and with an unlimited willingness to sacrifice. Now, Hassan Nasrallah makes a mistake. He thinks we've lost our nerve. No, we are now sufficiently well positioned to choose our measures in ways that do not involve in risking lives unnecessarily. We have the capacity. We have intelligence superiority. We have technological superiority. We can choose our set of means. If ever, God forbid, we are once again driven up against the wall, the spirit will be there again.
Ms. Slier, Dr. Lerman has been a senior officer in the Israeli Intelligence Corps, and he has learned his adversaries as well as Israel's allies, but you have an advantage of being able to roam around the Middle East, including places where Israelis are forbidden to travel to. Is that perception also common on the other side of the hill?
I think it is. Certainly in the conversations I've had, first and foremost, people recognize that Israel, although it's a secret, but an open secret, has a nuclear capability that other countries don't in this part of the world. So that is the first deterrence. The second deterrence is the Air Force. And I think it's accurate to say that ever since the 60s, Israel has ruled the skies, and whoever rules the skies rules over everywhere. Israel also has a very strong missile defense capability and is able to produce missiles as well. I do agree with your assessment in terms of how Israeli soldiers are perceived as ground offensives and ground operations. And when I've had that conversation, particularly with Palestinians, they're always quick to show me that there are videos that have circulated with Israeli soldiers crying, whether it was in Lebanon or in Gaza, and they always have a smirk on their face to say, well, Israeli soldiers are not what they used to be. That certainly is the perception that I encounter out there on the street. But aside from that, I think a lot of where the region is situated at the moment, there's shifting alliances, there's a lot of different issues at play. So the question of is Israel still a military power is a question that almost has been answered and doesn't necessarily seem to be changing.
Israel's base capabilities are probably its CIA, cyber intelligence and Air Force. And you, as a former Air Force pilot, must know the myth from the reality. Are Israeli Air Force pilots that good?
Well, first remember the basic question we're dealing with here has so many aspects. It's almost hard to attack it. And even when you say the Israeli Air Force, let's remember we fly American platforms. One of the reasons that our Air Force is the best in the world is because we fly American platforms, and now we fly the F-35. Are the Israeli pilots the best in the world? I don't know, but we do pretty well when we do international exercises like the Red Flag in the States, etc. Our track record here in wars has always been, 90 to 1 or 0. So, of course, this is the answer is pretty clear. Interesting, but the shift of the battlefield now is such that most of the sorties flown by the Air Force no longer have pilots in the cockpit. And I think in all other aspects we're dealing with, we're going more to autonomous platforms and robotics. So even here, I would recommend that in 2018, we maybe talk a little less about the ethos of the specific warrior at the front, but all the efforts combined. I think Israel's strategy in the last 20 years has been full spectrum dominance or superiority. I think this is the directive that has been given, and I think it's being fulfilled, especially in cyber and intelligence. If you ask me today, what is our most prominent ability that absolutely overwhelms our enemies, I think it is our intelligence.
For the last 20 years, the Air Force has employed female pilots too, as well as drone operators and others. Has it had any impact on Air Force quality and readiness?
In my opinion, this issue of integrating women in the fighting force and the Air Force is totally transparent. By the way, I have some extreme views that most of my Israeli friends do not like when it comes to ground forces, because there are physical differences between men and women that we can't deny. When it comes to the cockpit, there are no differences. The only differences are in our mind when it comes to culture. For instance, debating our resilience when it comes to a female falling captive into Hezbollah. And also here, I think this is no longer relevant. We're all the same. So as far as your question, in this field of the Air Force, not an issue.
Eran Lerman, the issue of quantity apparently has risen because of ancient equations in military science, whereby the attacker should have a 3-to-1 advantage over the defender. But this seems to belong to a different era of armored assaults. And we are now in an era of organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas, rocket launchings against the rear. Is it still that important to count beans, to count tanks, to count divisions?
At the end of the day, we have to differentiate between, and here again, I rely on this formative text of IDF doctrine. We don't have a national defense doctrine. I teach at seminar at Tel Aviv University. I call it Israeli Defense Doctrine, subtitled The Biology of Unicorns. No unicorns, no doctrine. But the IDF does have a doctrine. And nowadays they slice our reality 3 ways: peace and stability, normal operations, war, and in between a spectrum of, as I said, campaign operations between the wars. If we come to a full-scale confrontation with Hezbollah, a full war, which may also drag in Iranian elements, maybe the Syrian military, as we've seen in the past. Then maneuver will still be important. And the armored formations, the ability to bring a lot of firepower to bear deep inside enemy territory, to change the equation on the ground, to deny them the space from which they launch, will become important much faster than was the case in 2006. The same may go for Gaza. I heard this braggadocio from Sinwar, that he will rain rockets on Tel Aviv for 6 months. He would be very lucky to be alive at the end of 6 months.
The head of Hamas in Gaza.
The head of Hamas in Gaza.
Paula, from your perspective, when Israelis speak about the quality of the forces, what is the most important and salient ingredient? Is it the quality of high command, of the chain of command or command and control mechanism, or is it simply the private soldier, the sergeant, the junior officer? When you look at Israeli society and you meet so many people who are civilians by day and reservists by night, or regular soldiers, what is the answer?
Well, the one thing that has always struck me when I work and report here in Israel is that most people feel that Israel would just lose one war and that's the end of the state. So there's a kind of commitment that people are prepared to fight for their lives that I don't encounter when I travel the Arab world. I know, for example, I spent time in Syria, and you asked me earlier about what people on the ground there experience. I remember interviewing Hezbollah fighters, and they said to me that they appreciated the opportunity to fight in Syria to gain experience, because that would then afford them the chance to come back home to Lebanon and from there to use their experience against Israel. But they saw the Syria war as an opportunity to develop and enhance their skills. They didn't necessarily see it as fighting for their lives. And for me, that has always struck me as a very important difference with the way I perceive Israelis and how they feel about their army, that this really is the be-all and end-all of their existence. And that kind of commitment I haven't encountered on the Palestinian street, on the Arab street, at least not in the experience I've had.
But does that also apply to policing the territories?
Well, the experience in the territories is very different. When I ask Palestinians what they feel about Israeli soldiers, they very often say that they feel that Israel uses any kind of provocation with the Palestinians as an opportunity to test its military and to test any kind of new developments, new missiles, new anything. Now, I'm sure the Israelis would argue against that, but that certainly is a popular belief on the Palestinian street.
Reuven, what is the impact of technology? And we see huge leaps in technology, especially over the last several years. Does that make the Arab or Iranian soldier more the Israeli soldiers equal, or does that broaden the gap between the Israeli and his adversaries?
It's a difficult, again, balance, because our Israeli mentality and ethos is to talk about the soldier on the front line and the fighters, and we still, by the way, have to promote them and praise them, and everyone that bears arms and goes to the front line, we should admire this, and we need it. Golani soldiers we need. But our dominance today comes from technology. And our cyber abilities today that I think are overwhelming, maybe even a level of a superpower, and I don't use these terms lightly. Artificial intelligence.
President Clinton certainly thinks so, if you read his novel.
I believe, and I'm following what the leadership says, I'm following our abilities. I think cyber capabilities, defense, but mostly attack capabilities, I think we have incredible, overwhelming capabilities that probably baffle our enemies. Our intelligence capabilities, artificial intelligence, people don't even understand how this is incorporated. We talked about the territories, the fact that today terror attacks are thwarted before they even began just by analysis of artificial intelligence and analysts. So I think technology gives us a big leap forward. It's also no longer individual platforms. The fact that we're all networked, that we're a really joint service, that all watch a three-dimensional picture, that everyone has their pixel is equal to the same pixel that the Navy and the Air Force are looking at. So yes, I think technology completely changed the battlefield. Still, at the end of the day, a Golani soldier will have to maneuver and go and conquer the territory.
But if that's the case, if you can, by pushing a button or hitting enter, bring down the entire Iranian nuclear infrastructure, why is Israel so worried about what is happening around it.
You know, it's very interesting because the political debate inside of Israel reflects what you said. Some will say the threats are growing, which is why, by the way, our prime minister just declared that he's going to increase the defense budget, right? And the other side of the political map will say, no, he's just doing this for political reasons. Countries are falling apart. We no longer have tanks confronting us, no armies. Daesh is finished. Iran, look what we've been doing to them, hundreds of airstrikes. So he's doing it for political reasons, and in fact, the threats are reducing. I think that all in all, the challenges and threats are growing, and I think that we have a doctrine now of layer after layer after layer of protecting ourselves, physical barriers and missile defense, and also very interesting cyber capabilities. So I think it is all a mix, and it's all important. I wouldn't lower our gun just yet.
Ever since the late 1970s, when more and more Arab countries have been declared moderate and joined the American orbit, having left the Soviet one, especially after the Yom Kippur War, Egypt leading the camp, but also Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, Israel has insisted that the United States downgrade whatever it is exporting to these countries vis-a-vis what it gives Israel. For instance, the F-15 fighter at the time, and now the F-35. Is it really that important, Colonel Lerman?
Well, first of all, it's not just an Israeli insistence. It's now written into U.S. law. It's called QM, the concept of the QME, Qualitative Military Edge. I don't think this was something that would have happened simply because of Israel's insistence. It is grounded in an American understanding. And today, I would add to this the understanding of a number of Arab countries that Israeli military superiority, qualitatively, if not quantitatively, is essentially a very important stabilizer for the entire region. Just one example. The ability of Jordan to serve as a base of operations for the U.S. coalition-led coalition against IS and in other respects, rests essentially on the fact that Jordan never has to worry about its survival because Israel has its back and never has to look at Israel as a threat and basically is within the Israeli defense envelope, so to speak. And I could take this further. And of course, now we're facing the Iranian challenge, facing the ambitions of the Iranian revolutionary regime across the region. Israel's military abilities are an asset for the United States, and they are an asset for a good number of regional players. So the QME remains a very useful and very important concept. It can be pushed in two different directions, by downgrading what is given to Arab countries, one way, and of course by keeping Israel at the top end of state-of-the-art technology. I think it's mostly the second rather than the first nowadays. We have come to, I don't think we fought a battle against an Arab arms deal in the United States since the AWACS battle.
1981.
In 81, which we lost narrowly, but this was a lesson learned and never to do this ever again for the administration and for the Saudis. And I think we've come to a workable modus vivendi.
The model usually is giving Israel the best platform that the United States has and let Israel put its own avionics, its own black box inside, which even the Americans
that worked for the F-16s and F-15s. The F-35 is an integrated system. It works differently. But we are very much part of it. It wouldn't fly without wings. The wings are made here.
But there is also the problem of logistics, of sustainment and maintenance, which is not the best hand that the Arab militaries have. Saudis and others are dependent on contractors and other foreigners. Ms. Slier, is there a difference in the concept by which Israel and its adversaries fight? For Hamas, for instance, as well as for Hezbollah, it is enough to draw, to get a tie in a in a fight, if you lengthen the fight for more than a week, you can say that you were victorious because Israel had to fight. Some of its civilians may have been evacuated. There were air raid sirens in Tel Aviv. Ben Gurion Airport was shut down for a day and a half. Does that mean that Israel did not manage to devise a way to translate its qualitative edge into a better plan?
Well, the same kind of debate happens in Israeli society, where every few years there's another war, for example, with Gaza. And then the conversation in Israel is, well, you'll have those elements of the population saying Israel should have been there longer, should have completely wiped out the entire infrastructure of Hamas. And you'll have others who say, no, it was time to withdraw. Israel always has to take heedance of what the international community is saying. And the last few wars that have been fought in Gaza have sat very badly in terms of Israel's perception in the international community. And gradually, the feeling I have is that Israel is losing credibility, or at least respect, and increasingly is facing criticism for the way it handles its wars in Gaza and against the Palestinians. So that is part and parcel of any kind of operation that Israel carries out, is how is the international community perceiving it. So whether or not Israel stops too soon, or whether or not it continues, is really a question for debate, and different people will have different things to say about it. But certainly the Palestinians that I talk to would say that Israel far overextends its welcome, and that these wars should not be happening in the first place.
Reuven, let's talk about casualties, about the human cost on two levels. One is in training, in peacetime. There was a time when the Air Force, by honing its edge, used to lose some 20 or so aircraft every year, and most of the aircrew did not survive. And almost magically, it has changed. And for the last couple of decades, it has gone down dramatically. Does that reflect the sort of quality Israel aspires to? And does that impair the ability of the Air Force during wartime to get better results because it is not training realistically?
Mm-hmm. I think this is a sensitive issue because we many times try to assess our resilience, and this is a very important part of the resilience. If I look at this through the eyes of my American friends, they could do a raid in Iraq to some compound and come back with 10 body bags, and it's okay. We're not like that. And I'm not saying we're better. I'm in a way even saying we should be as professional as they are. The last campaign we had in Gaza, the number of casualties that we had were such that it was a big burden on the Israeli society to even accept it. And looking forward to wars, this is a very important piece. I think that people that deal with this kind of strategy try to preach that this is a part of war. You asked about casualties during peacetime and training. There, I think the reason is just simply being a good organization, good methodologies. My squadron specifically, we have 40 pictures on the wall. I was in the one squadron for 23 years. I had lost 23 friends during that time. And that was the price of training and wartime. The Second Lebanon War, we flew in 12 helicopters. We came back 11. One was shot down. I hope the bereaved family is not watching me now, but I'll tell you again, strategically, that's okay. That is war.
And you had 5 aircrew members killed.
5 were tragically killed, but that is the part of war. I still assess that today the Israeli resilience as a nation understands very well that that is the cost of war. I think even more than the past, in the next war in the north, we're going to see maneuver, like was mentioned today, we're going to see maneuver much faster than in the past, understanding very well the prices that come with that. Of course, with more autonomous system, robotics, technology, I think many times we're going to have less people maybe in the battlefield, but that is still going to be the price of war, and we accept it.
It's an old Navy axiom from many centuries ago. Never send a man to do what a bullet can do. And now we are in the standoff era, where it is even easier to launch a missile from 100 miles offshore or more, or from or a surface-to-surface missile. But isn't part of the reason, in addition to those killed in battle, the fear of Israelis of their soldiers being abducted, kidnapped, and then held for ransom, which has happened with Gilad Shalit until 7 years ago. And even now, as we are talking, the situation in Gaza is held hostage until the Israeli bodies and to civilians who are held there are released.
Well, it is a weakness of Israeli society. The Shalit affair was totally out of proportion. You're thinking, we are a democracy. America is a democracy. Now under the understandings with Kim Jong-un, a few bodies came back from 60 years ago. The American people were not obsessed by this absence. For us, it is has become, I say, to some extent, it's been manipulated by the media because it is a very powerful emotional story. And emotional stories sell papers and play the media. Shalit was certainly made into a national figure by very intense political and media.
So there is a tension between domestic politics driven by families or by the media and the national military program?
Certainly. I think the IDF takes into account that this is possible as well. Look, I'm the son of a POW. My father spent 9 months in Jordan. We had hundreds of prisoners of war taken in the War of Independence. The attitudes have definitely changed. We've become very, very sensitive in this respect, perhaps overly so, and there are efforts to change, almost maybe even by legislation, certainly by new policy directives, the proportions of any future exchange. We can no longer play this on the basis of 1,000 to 1.
I don't know. I mean, I was one of the journalists who covered the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit. And when I spoke to soldiers at the time, when you say it was a weakness, I came away with the impression that it was a strength. Because what soldiers kept saying to me is that if this is the strength and this is the extent that a country is prepared to go to bring back a soldier, it gave them added courage to actually go into battle.
That is true. But also, I think we've already paid you 7 lives for this one boy who was brought back.
Reuven, in closing, how cost-effective is it for Israel to keep investing in its qualitative military edge?
It's not a matter of cost-effectiveness because it's our very existence. So we have no choice. That is the basic essence of our doctrine. We want to exist. To exist, we have to be strong. Only if we will be strong and powerful will we exist here, survive. And by the way, only if we're strong, we're going to have peace. And the only way to do that now is investing in technologies, full spectrum superiority. So I think there's no question on this matter.
Colonel Lerman, can Israel keep its edge? If other countries have enough resources, they could equal what Israel is doing.
Well, it's not just a matter of resources. It's a question of the culture. Paradoxically, our culture of questioning, of never accepting authority, is a very powerful driver in the innovative nature of the IDF as an institution and of our industries. And I think we can keep that edge. We have to. And by now, it is becoming part of what is making us also internationally significant in ways which were not relevant a generation ago.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lerman, Ms. Slier, and Colonel Ben Shalom. Shalom from Jerusalem, and we'll see you next time.
TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.